everyone. My name's Dr. Osama Hashmi. I'm a dermatologist, so treat a little bit of cancer in Atlanta, and a co-founder and the CEO of Empiricus or Doc Update. Real quick, my whole background is around building technology and building things that are going to be beneficial for physicians to improve our lives and practice medicine the way that it should be practiced. We're really excited today to kick off a wonderful conversation with some of the greatest oncologists of this generation, with Dr. Shalaan Beg, Emil Lou, and Shruti Patel, with a live taping of Only Oncs in the building here at ASCO. This is an amazing thing for me because my whole career is around giving physicians platforms and voices and thinking about how we can be part of the table that is affecting the care that we deliver and the care that our patients receive. And so looking forward to a wonderful dynamic conversation around all things oncology, and hope everyone has a great time listening in. We'll pass it over to y'all.
So, hi guys, I'm so excited you are all here. We're the only oncologists in the building, and we're here because we somehow convinced ourselves that people want to hear us talk outside of Instagram and X. So here we are. We have a podcast where we talk about science. We talk about headlines, usually bad headlines. And we also talk about chai recipes and whether TSA pre-check or clear is better.
Pre-check.
Yeah, I was going to say yes, exactly. Anyways, we are really excited you guys are here.
I want to give a big thank you to Doc Update and Empiricus for having us, for sponsoring us, and especially for tonight. Thank you so much.
So initially when we started off, Emil and I have been working in the social media space for a little while in oncology. 2 years ago, we met Shruti and we would bully her. We made her record videos as Emil and I would do. I don't know if you remember that punching trend on TikTok many years ago. And then we decided to include her in the videos and actually bring content. And then Only Oncologists in the building was started.
So fun fact, Emil is actually famously known for helping ASCO get their first foray into social media, except I still give him a lot of shit because the first foray into social media was on Snapchat, which is just, yeah, I know, everyone's laughing because that's hilarious.
Actually, the first foray of Emil doing social media for oncology dates back to probably AACR 2014 or 2015. That video is still up there. He's going around the posters, like finding innocent victims and sitting with them and having them talk about their research. It's still up on YouTube. You should search him as Cancer Assassin, and you will find him finding innocent bystanders and just. And he just kept asking question after question. He just wouldn't let go.
That's my whole life, just asking questions. Just don't be surprised that I'm really hip to the scene and get jiggy with it. So just know that.
So we're going to start with something that has been in the news a lot. And I think our patients come to us and they ask us about the latest trials, which are cancer vaccines. And now my dad's a cancer biologist. So I've been hearing about cancer vaccines since I've been in literal diapers. But this year, something feels like a little different. And I want to know why.
So, as you said, this is not new in the making. For decades, cancer vaccines have promised a lot, but delivered a little, kind of like Vanilla Ice's career. So the problem is that we treated the vaccine concept as if this were a virus. And we know that tumor cells are an amplification or exaggeration of normal cells, but the difference is they're really subversive. They shut down the immune microenvironment. And so the problem of how to get a vaccine that would truly stimulate something that's already understimulated is really a big challenge. But some of the differences that we have technology in the last 5 to 6 years that are much more mature, right? They're not brand new, but genomic sequencing to be able to tailor to the individual patient, especially with the maturation of mRNA vaccines in COVID. In that era brought to the forefront, we have a combination of better tumor sequencing, the mRNA technology, and the combination immunotherapy to rev up the immune system while also overcoming those immunosuppressive issues. So I think all of those are coming forward, but we're still not there yet, including some of the abstracts presented at this annual meeting are still very much kind of the tip of the iceberg, very much pilot data.
So when you think about the different vaccine studies and how they've been designed, you have the different mechanism of vaccines. So you have the the neoantigen vaccines, which are using individual tumor-specific vaccines, most of them using mRNA technology. Then you have the tumor-associated vaccines as well. And when you listen to a lot of the headlines over the last few years around cancer vaccines, they were focused on, does the vaccine lead to an immune response? So they would give the participant a vaccine, they would do blood tests and see whether they mounted an appropriate immune response or not. Then we started to hear that, yes, the vaccine caused an immune response. And then we started to hear that the immune responders do have an improvement in their cancer outcomes. So right now, when you look at the vaccine studies, you have I think you have like 3 pancreatic cancer vaccines that are showing all of them have an immune response. There's an esophageal cancer vaccine showing that it has an immune response. But some of the cancers are now showing an anti-tumor effect, with melanoma being furthest along, showing a potential clinical effectiveness. And then the Memorial Sloan Kettering vaccine study, which is a tiny cohort, but outstanding results, which keeps this space really, really exciting and in the headlines.
Yeah, I think what we're hearing about most in the clinic is those patients who had an immune response after they had, and this was a recent trial where they had the pancreas cancer, they had it removed. They took what they learned from the pancreas cancer and they put it in a vaccine and they injected into these patients. And the people who had that immune response that you're talking about had really improved disease-free survival, right? The cancer didn't come back. And that's because the idea is the immune system is like surveilling the body. If they see that, it attacks it. And I think that that's like so exciting, but there's so many more questions, right? Why are some patients responding to these vaccines? Why are they not? And I think that there's just so much more, but I do think from when my dad was talking about it back in the day, I do think we're seeing a shift where we're actually seeing some clinical efficacy.
But when you think about how vaccines are being talked about on Reddit, they're talking about the COVID vaccines. They're talking about regular vaccines, which we're getting as well. So it's important to also recognize that there are probably about 4 or 5 different studies from different cohorts that are suggesting that people who had a COVID mRNA vaccine and happened to be on immune therapy for their cancer, the folks who got the COVID mRNA vaccine had better cancer outcomes. There's already a clinical trial which is seeing whether that's going to have an impact on a prospective study, but these are different data sets. And I know when Emil talks about vaccines, he's talking about tumor-associated vaccine, not other vaccines that were like flu shots and COVID vaccines. But there's a lot that we need to understand in terms of, like, is there something about the mRNA technology which is stimulating the immune system? Is there something about the immunogenicity around the COVID immune response, or something completely different which we don't know in that space? But we're hearing a lot of chatter and discussion around this topic, even though it's many years into the pandemic, and this keeps coming up. And with more mRNA vaccines being used for infectious disease purposes, this question becomes even more relevant.
Yes, I will just conclude by saying that yes, but this is only the 10 to 15% of all patients with pancreas adenocarcinoma that have a tumor localized that you can even think about having it removed with intent to cure. So that naturally, when you talk about the survival curves, those are the patients who are likely to live for years. We are still waiting for the maturation of those data, right, to see who recurs, who will live longer. The tumor neoantigen aspect is a very cutting edge aspect of the science, but it is not a sine qua non. It is something that under 50% of neoantigens are actually have reactivity when the T cells in the correlative studies. So there's a lot of promise to this, obviously, but it's also when the patients with stage 4 disease ask me about this, the principle is the same as with viruses. It's to prevent or diminish the effects of or virus, in the case of influenza or others, or in the case of cancer, diminish the chance of recurrence, but it still remains nonetheless. It's promising, and let's wait more data and the maturation of the next generation 2.0 of this.
Absolutely. So really quickly, what cancer type do you think is going to benefit the most from cancer vaccines?
I think melanoma was furthest along when it came to checkpoint inhibitors, and it'll be first in the vaccine space.
I think the selective early stage 4 form of colorectal cancers, in which we'll call oligometastatic disease, that they have surgically removable metastases with intent to cure. We're always trying to find ways to diminish the chance of recurrence. I think that could be very promising in that arena.
Absolutely. All right. Now our next segment's going to be it's going to be rapid fire. Okay. So what is the most overhyped buzzword of ASCO this year?
Electronic patient-reported outcomes.
Explain.
We've been talking about electronic patient-reported outcomes and monitoring patient-reported outcomes leading to improved cancer survival since 2021. Plenary talk at ASCO 2021, and so many studies since then haven't been able to show an effect. And here this time there are American studies and there's some Japanese studies which again are showing that routine monitoring of electronic patient-reported outcomes for regular cancer patients in our clinic does not lead to improved outcomes. Those results we haven't been able to replicate them, whether that's because of the supportive care structures that other institutions have, which the original institution had that now we don't really develop, or there's something other in terms of the real world implementation of technology, which can be a huge challenge. We don't know, but I think routine collection of EPROs for cancer patients just isn't panning out to improve survival.
All right, what's your most overhyped buzzword?
Cure. The most overhyped word of the year is cure, because we always talk about intent to cure, but it creates in many cases a false hope for the research has not yet caught up. So I would say we talk a lot about the intent of therapy in terms of palliative intent, chemotherapy or other types of therapies. If we can significantly improve quality of life and patients still have intact disease and almost make it induce a chronic state of disease like we talk about diabetes that's not curable, then I think that's a major achievement for many of these hard to treat, vicious, poor prognosis type of cancers. So I would say cure, overhyped.
I think it's great. So you're absolutely right. For most folks, we know that the way treatments are right now, expecting a cure is not reasonable. But when you're in the R&D space, I think having a big, hairy, audacious goal such as cure makes sense.
Yeah.
My overhyped buzzword is ctDNA. I like that someone laughed because I want the science to get better before we start just doling it out. I think we are marketing ctDNA to patients before the science is as good as I
Well,
want
which
it to be.
application of ctDNA annoys you?
The one that the one that doesn't have data, right? So I think obviously I use it in stage 2 colorectal cancer, even in MSI high. You know, when you're stage 4, if you're trying to cure them and you're using ctDNA monitor, because we know those patients shed more DNA. But I think we are using ctDNA to treat anxiety frequently. And if the test was incredible, I think I would understand that. But I think it's giving people false hope, to your point, and I have problems with that. So
I take it you're not the person checking it every week and then having a graph made for your patient, or the patient's coming in with the graph. But I think when you say it's fraught with anxiety is when that does happen and it's there and you cannot see it in imaging, and what do you do about it? And then the oncologist who ordered it is saying, I don't know. Man, I would think the cortisol levels like shoot through the roof. But what do you do about it? We don't know, not validated yet.
Absolutely. I think we need better drugs. It's like that the ctDNA is going up. I want better drugs to, like, you know, attack that. All right, we're gonna do this actually really quickly now.
Yeah.
What's the abstract everybody's talking about in the hallways? Emil.
So it's a lead-in from AACR meeting. Daraxonrasib, I said it. DAX is for short. But even though we're hearing about the plenary, it's more updated data. It's still on the tip of everyone's tongues. And when are we going to get the drug?
Absolutely.
So I couldn't come up with one abstract, so I'm going to go with artificial intelligence, its use in clinical operations, monitoring patients, and even in research. There's some good studies showing AI for translating documents, monitoring patients is starting to make a difference in operations.
Awesome. Mine is GLP-1s. Everyone's talking about them. The news is talking about them. There's really interesting data. My only kind of caveat is that obviously there's a lot of affiliate links. There's a lot of people selling it online to patients who have cancer. It's really unclear if there's like benefits to the GLP-1s outside of metabolic benefits. So if someone is very metabolically healthy, skinny, low BMI, do they need to take it? I think that we really need to understand that, because our patients are vulnerable, and the affiliate links, they're linking, you know, like there's a lot of them. All right, biggest surprise from ASCO.
So I would say ASCO in the main pavilion has a survival station. You have a headache, go get your Advil. You have a boo-boo, you get your Band-Aids. They have feminine hygiene products. They came prepared this year. I'm really proud of ASCO.
There's no Walgreens around here.
There
so
is
like
no.
around McCormick. So
Nowhere.
it's really
Go to the
nice.
ASCO survival station. They're taking care of you. McCormick is too far from everything.
Absolutely.
Emil, you haven't seen the trainee and young oncologists lounge.
We aged
It is
out, didn't we?
phenomenal. They have their own concierge, they have a stage, they have snacks. There is no country for old men.
It's pretty incredible, and I'm still allowed in there. And then my biggest surprise from ASCO is mobile ordering at Starbucks. Life-changing. I don't have to wait in a line. I still get my brown sugar shaken espresso. It's 10 out of 10. What is one thing you think patients will find surprising about ASCO?
I think for all we was talking about hype and everything that makes the news, you go back on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday to clinic, and I think what surprises people is that I won't have access to some of the drugs that made the biggest headlines. and it may not be for months, not just days or a few weeks.
Absolutely.
So she circulated these questions beforehand, so my answer is very different than Emil. What's surprising for me is that when I'm running between meetings, I sometimes don't have time to pee. So I think I'll stop at the toilet on my way to the other meeting, and I don't, and I'm overdue.
That's the most surprising thing. I love that you don't pee. 10 out of 10. I think that, yeah, the most surprising thing is that we spend more time in meetings than actually going to watch the sessions, and then we have to watch them later on the plane back or something like that. All right, practice changing abstract.
Okay, I'm not a hematologist, but I was reviewing the BITE cell therapy for multiple myeloma. These are bispecific T cell engager study. Monotherapy BITE cell engager for people with multiple myeloma who have had 1 to 3 lines of therapy with a hazard ratio of 0.29,
Yeah.
which is phenomenal for monotherapy for any refractory disease. Patients who were receiving standard of care could receive their BITE therapy on progression, and the overall survival benefits still persisted. So giving these treatments early on is making a big difference. These treatments are really hard to tolerate for a lot of individuals. You think it's a every 4-week sub-Q injection. 2/3, about half of the patients have cytokine release syndrome. 40% of the patients have significant infections compared to 20% who don't receive those treatments. So take it with a couple pinches of salt, but in my mind, practice-changing treatment.
That's awesome. All right, I'm going to tell you guys about interesting abstract, but not quite ready for prime time. So there was an abstract that looked at fasting before chemotherapy. So the patients basically had to fast for 24, 48 hours before they got chemotherapy, and then a little bit afterwards. And it was in neoadjuvant therapy for ovarian cancer. Again, not a gynecology, gyn-onc doc, but what ended up happening was it increased pathologic complete response rates by about 60%. And their obviously overall survival improved. It was a cohort of like 18 patients, so it's not, a huge number of patients, but it is really interesting because there's a lot of, again, back to my GLP-1, discussion previously, it is really interesting to understand how insulin signaling and all of that plays into how we're taking care of cancer patients. And so but I'm always skeptical of small studies because there was an IV vitamin C study for pancreatic cancer that showed if you add vitamin C, huge overall survival benefit. But then when it was published and you looked at the baseline characteristics of the 2 cohorts, the patients who didn't get IV vitamin C also had quite a bit more peritoneal disease and all of that. And so, I think it's really important that we look at all aspects of the cancer treatment. All right, and now what do you not buy from ASCO this year?
Well, I'm a skeptic at heart as a scientist. So if I'm going to choose, we talked about ctDNA before. So now I'll go to the other end of the spectrum for screening, multi-cancer early detection, all the hot rage. Can we detect cancers at their earliest stage? And now a pilot trial that was intended to be a pilot trial, the NHS Gallery, mad respect that they enrolled 142,000 people in the UK. The median age was 66, 7.5% had previous cancer, which I found interesting. Not sure why they even included that as a potential confounder. So it's a study that did not meet its endpoint, but it was intended to start as a pilot trial. I'm not sure where it went a little hog wild, but they admit that while their goal was to try and detect cancer at a much earlier stage in stage 4, they explained it away as kind of saying they're more we're at stage 3. I don't buy it, Shruti. I think that the devil's advocate needs to be in play is I think there's going to be subgroup analysis galore, and I'm sure there'll be many papers and high impact journals and more plenary and other oral presentations to pass. But at the end of the day, not all cancers shed DNA. And part of what they broke down in the 20 cancers they were trying to detect, the majority of which were GI cancers. And you and I both know, whether it's pancreas adenocarcinoma is the most notorious, colorectal, esophageal, biliary tract, not all cancers as a subtype shed them very well, and others. But where we're in the other parts of the clinic looking at stage 4, you're more prone to get it there, right? But in cancer, in its nascent, earliest stages of carcinogenesis, I'm not buying that ctDNA kind of a pan test, as much as I love that panacea for people who want to avoid colonoscopies, filling the gap for cancers for which we don't yet have screening tests. I'm not buying it.
I mean, I completely agree with you. And we know that there were companies that advertised at the Super Bowl and for their multi-cancer detection test. And it's like, I think a huge problem because people are scared of cancer.
Yeah.
Like everyone, even though more people die of heart disease, people are more scared of cancer. And obviously, I totally get it. I'm an oncologist, but it's a really good way to market on people's fear. And I just think the tests need to be better. We need to figure out how to have early detection. And I don't think blood test is the end all be all because what we know about shedding. And so that's kind of what we have to talk about. Joining us now is Dr. Osama Hashmi. He's a physician, entrepreneur, and CEO of Empiricus and Doc Update. He trained as a dermatologist at Emory and has spent his career focused on one big question. How do we help clinicians cut through the noise and stay informed and get patients to treatment quicker, right? That's what you're here. That's what you're here to do. And so importantly, I'm going to like toot your horn a little. Last year, Deloitte named Empiricus the #1 fastest growing company in North America. That's wild. That's incredible. I'm very proud. We're really excited to have him join our conversation tonight. So can we get a round of applause for him coming up?
Thanks for having me.
We as clinicians, we always want to help people. And I think a lot of us here have a lot of ideas on how we can help people. But I also think people in healthcare are a little bit risk averse. I think we like stability, and I think clinical medicine gives us a sense of stability, right? There's like a lot of risk in kind of putting ourselves out there and possibly going after an idea. And I wanted to ask you kind of if you could tell us a little bit about what gave you that, like that oomph, that push that got you there, and if we could all learn from that.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's kind of two sides to the question. Is it as risky as you think? And then secondly is kind of how do you have the courage or thought to kind of pursue something? So I'll start with the first one, which is generally I think people watch Shark Tank and think the way to build a company is quit everything, go all in, and that's how you do it. But there's a lot of other ways to build companies. And I do think the risk right now is you look at how medicine is being practiced, you look at how reimbursements are being cut, you look at how there's more corporatization, you look at how everything that we want to do for our patients has so many barriers that are not around what is best for the patient or what's best for the physician. And the first thing I think is that it's risky being a physician today without having a voice at the table, without having some control in terms of your own destiny. So my first thought is that there's so many problems that it's kind of our position and kind of our responsibility for our patients to step up and try to solve those. The second is it's not that hard to find a problem in healthcare that needs to be fixed. There are numerous throughout any interaction that you could see. For Empiricus, we started thinking about how do we create ethical relationships between pharma and physicians, but it's questions around how does insurance interact with patients or how does insurance interact with physicians? Think about the stakeholders and think about if you could reorient this relationship where it would be, and then think about how you can solve it. Kind of similar to a good med student, the key criteria is to be humble and to be curious and keep digging into that problem. What you'll find is that people are trying to solve it, and people lack probably the most important thing that you have as a physician, which is an understanding of how medicine should be practiced, understanding of what the patient life looks like, understanding of what it means to be a doctor and what it means to, be at home and writing notes or be at home and getting a call from a patient that you really cared about. Those are the things that, as people who build businesses, they don't see and they don't feel, but are things that I think are the most important criteria. So it's a little bit of understanding that, we have a responsibility and it's not as risky as you think to jump into a company. And then a little bit of identifying a really good problem that you feel passionate about and you can be curious towards.
That's awesome. I think it's like so important for us to to your point, you have people building businesses who don't really know our day to day, right? And so recognizing that what the problem that needs to be solved is, but you gotta but it's hard. I think it's hard. I have a lot of ideas, but I'm like, how do you but I gotta take care of my patients and I'm scared and I think it's hard.
It's overwhelming. So we're in the age of information overload in oncology, right? So the rapid pace of FDA approvals and everything that's happening in the landscape of oncology week per week. I mean, I'm burnt out by Friday, but I have to recharge for the following week. So how do you see that landscape? How do we approach that with that so much information changing so rapidly, and how to keep up with it?
And I'm sure there's a lot of fellows in the room. I mean, the first thing is that training never stops, and you guys know this, that once you become an attending, I heard this once from my attendings, which is that's really when your training starts. You really learn from those patients. And I think the first step is just thinking about your patients, and as opposed to, let's go through this patient and this visit as quickly as possible. You can even take 10 seconds, a minute to reflect on that patient and learn a little bit more about what's going on in that disease state. So that's number one. It's that mindset of the learning never stops. The second thing is having really amazing peers and people that you can trust to talk to about patients, but understanding kind of how they think about what's going on and what's relevant, just like the conversation that you guys just had. And the third is I do think that there's a lot of wonderful resources out there. So through Empiricus and Doc Update, we have a concierge that allows MSLs and other people to engage with physicians. There's online learning opportunities. There's amazing conferences. I find, and especially in the dermatology space, would love to hear your perspective on oncology. Sometimes the smaller conferences, the ones that it's a little bit more local or a little bit more kind of disease state specific, that's where you get a lot of really great nuggets. But I think the biggest thing is mindset. I think nobody wants to be that attending 30 years from now that everyone looks at as like, is he doing voodoo? And that attending is just someone who never kept learning, and we all had one. So you just want to keep a mindset of humility and staying active for our patients.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think while I love big conferences like ASCO, I completely agree. Like, you get your best learning and your best just even networking with people who are just taking care of the same patients you are in those smaller conferences. For me, it's like ASCO GI, and you get to like talk about what you do because we have different practice patterns across institutions, and so I think it's across dermatology, oncology. I think it's the same.
Yeah. Well, yeah, touching upon that information aspect, I think whether it's electronic medical record that we all have, and now there's sharing between institutions, and also just what you're doing with Duck Update and other aspects of the computers that we all have in our hands, or otherwise in our pocket at all times, more so in our hands than otherwise. But how do we speak to the aspect of security and potential breaches and just concerns about that? Because that's a concern that we have to safeguard the privacy of our patients, but that's really a very different landscape than 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I think one is we all have a responsibility as professionals to, be careful of the emails that you click, be careful of the things that you're submitting online, be careful of where information is. And I think there's a baseline kind of responsibility we all have now living in the 21st century, especially in the age of AI. I think there's two kind of angles to this question. One is us using those tools. There's thoughts around know kind of what the companies are, what are their motives, learn about who's running those companies. You'd be surprised at some of the things that we use on a daily basis and kind of what they're doing with the information that we're providing them or with our patients. And the second is, if you think about your own style, if you're trying to build something or trying to share information, there's a lot of ways to do that that's HIPAA compliant. There's a lot of ways that kind of enterprises are setting things up. And I will say one thing that I've seen really change over the past few years is the academic institutions are really getting to learn more that, hey, we can't safeguard everything. We have to think about how we open up our gates a little bit more and how we can build those rails. I think that's going to be an interesting development over the next few years, which is there's so much innovation happening. These academic institutions are having a really big problem taking that innovation that's happening so fast outside, bringing them in a secure environment. But people like the people in this room, I think, are going to be really important in terms of leading those conversations.
Absolutely. We have like secure GPT now within Epic, and I was like, what? This is amazing. So I do think the academic institutions are, trying to figure this out. Okay, I have one more question for you, which is a big theme at ASCO, I feel like this year has been, and I'm curious both of your thoughts about how do we get clinical trials just done faster? We got to, there's so many roadblocks, IRB approval. Of course, that's important. I'm not saying it's not. But there's all these roadblocks to getting clinical trials up and running. There's so many, telemedicine has not really been as incorporated in clinical trials as I kind of thought it would be during COVID. And so how do you think just AI technology with just explosion of technology, I would say in the last few years, how do you think that's going to help us get drugs to patients faster?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And a lot of people come to me for advice in terms of building companies, or I'm investing in companies. And one of the first things I tell people is that problems in healthcare are usually not technology problems. They're usually people problems, in the sense that the technology exists out there, but it's kind of to what I said before. Are the stakeholders talking to each other? Do we have the right buy-in from the right people? And so if we think about moving things faster, it's how do we use technology in a way to expedite our IRB? We've all done IRBs. No, it doesn't need to be an 800-word page PDF. Who knows? How do we think about, and we're doing this at Doc Update, how do we connect community physicians with clinical trial sites where they can refer patients, but also feel like that patient will come back to them and they still have ownership over that relationship? How do we think about connecting pharma to people who want to become investigators or people who want to learn more about clinical trials? There's so many stakeholders, and I think that viewpoint is probably the most important viewpoint of, to your point about getting to those smaller conferences. the information is the same, but that relationship matters so much when it comes to dealing with patients and why we all went into medicine. That I think that's going to be the key, which is going to be thinking about how do we leverage the technology that's out there, and how do we have environments like this where different stakeholders can be talking, and then how can we, as physicians or even as patients, be the ones who are leading those conversations versus people with profit incentives being the ones leading those conversations.
Yeah, it seems like there are like a million moving parts and a million barriers, right? But if I break it down on what AI can do for that, I think of the right trial, I would say right drug, but in this case, right clinical trial for the right patient at the right time. And if we can use, as you said, secure GPT in your electronic medical record, can't wait to see what other AI is applied, but if it can extract the medical record, so much better than any manual or anything to date, any software to date, to extract the genomic information, the demographic information, and practically in an instant, what would probably take me a week. So I'm a little slow with the computer. But if it could filter that and then match with a trial automatically, that would be such a game changer, and I don't use that lightly. But I think AI in so many respects can help the IRB go through it much quicker, and so maybe they could have automatic meetings. It won't take a month or longer, but I think really the acceleration, accelerate the synergy, and I think the human aspect that you're saying, Osama, is so crucial. It should never replace, it will never replace that human element, but I would say catalyze it so much more quickly and help us kind of separate the wheat from the chaff and go right to the heart of the matter, what needs to be, what requires human problem solving.
Can I ask a question that I know is off the script, but you guys are the right people to talk about this. I've seen a lot of articles, and I'm just a dermatologist, but thinking about people who are now using AI to kind of sequence their own genome, then potentially create custom immunotherapy. Someone did it for their dog and was able to see amazing results. Now, that's talking about no clinical trial. It's an N of 1 therapy, but what do you guys think about that? Is it real? Is it not real? Is it the future?
I think, so to our point about cancer vaccines, right? I do think that obviously figuring out what neoantigens are in your tumor and trying to get the immune response going is absolutely the future. I am very skeptical about, I'm kind of like, I think there's so much out there online of, people saying, oh, this worked for me, you should do this thing. And I think there's a reason why we have all these rigorous, why the IRB exists, why our data needs to be reported in a certain fashion. It's because it is very easy to lie for money.
Yep.
It is just the reality. And it's very easy to kind of give stories. And I think that's what I feel like.
Anecdotal evidence is very powerful. It's
so
not a
powerful.
randomized controlled trial.
It is so powerful though. And I get, like, if I were someone who had a dog that I absolutely loved, I would also want to do that. And so I don't blame people for believing it, but I think that, there's a reason why we do trials, and there's a reason why we ask for evidence. And so I do think that the funneling your data into ChatGPT, it's obviously can be really helpful for our patients, but sometimes it brings up a lot more questions than answers. And the reality is we don't have all the answers in medicine, and that is just the unfortunate reality. That's why we keep coming here, we keep doing research, and we keep kind of pushing.
Yeah, I'm not trusting AI at that level. Anything, it's like AI is in kindergarten right now. Just to give an example, for a PowerPoint presentation, I wanted to produce a hepatobiliary system picture. Beautiful picture, color graphics. I said, now label it. It came up with hepatomemular carcinoma instead of hepatocellular carcinoma. So I'm like, then I asked it, and it had the audacity to go against me. I said, label this spelled correctly, and it said, no, this is spelled correctly, and it kept it going. So I'm like, talking back to me like my kids. I mean, this is ridiculous. So I'm not trusting it to devise single immunotherapies anytime soon.
I talk with a lot of different tech CEOs, and I found the greatest description of AI. It's like an amazing intern that just occasionally lies and is very confident when it lies, and that's probably the most dangerous intern.
Really.
That's like unquestioned.
Yeah, exactly.
That you're like, if you lie to me once, it's game over, right?
Exactly.
And so it's just, that's exactly what AI is.
It's too serious.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We're so excited that you're all here. We're so excited to go to this event and enjoy ourselves. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.